Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Management, a VUCA perspective. We are discussing core concepts, and right now we are at the 9th module in the entire series. We've been discussing segmentation, targeting, positioning and various cases which we will delve into further today as we go into the details of two very interesting and important case studies to learn from. My name is Siddhiprad Bhattacharya and I am your host and I am your friend on this amazing journey in marketing management. So, like we discussed, products are created in the factory, but brands are created in the mind, and the minds of the consumers are where people from marketing need to reach out to and tap into. You do this through a variety of positioning strategies, and you put your particular thought process of what you are, why you are there, and what difference are you creating in the minds of the consumer through the communication, through the positioning, through the various activities that you take on as a marketer. So, when you do so, the consumer starts to discern you and keep you separate from whatever else is there in terms of the competition. So, here discerning customers want more, and they want to appeal to a specific consumer where the needs are a particular way, and that is the standpoint from which you observe the consumer and their actions, and your positioning is structured in a way so that it appeals to them so that they are able to feel comfortable in their choice of having sided with you. This is critically important so that they stay with you as lifetime consumers and give you value throughout their entire shelf life. Which brings us to today's case studies, the Mahindra Xylo and Kellogg's in India. Both very well known brands, both very well known names. So, these are the two case studies we'll cover in our conversation today. Let's start with Mahindra Xylo. Now, the gentleman by the name of Rajesh Jejurikar, he played a pivotal role in setting up M&M, that is Mahindra and Mahindra's dominance in the utility vehicle segment. Now, utility vehicles are a very happening and very well accepted segment in India. They provide the necessary ruggedness that is required for Indian roads and off-roads, as well as they provide the necessary space, the driving comfort, the road presence and what have you, so that people feel comfortable. In fact, UVs and now SUVs are typically the major growing segment in all of India's automobile sector. Now, in order to address this from Mahindra's tables, the Scorpio was launched, which was a robust offering and it was obviously backed by a robust marketing plan. Now, over time, what happened was it started facing a certain amount of stagnation, and Mahindra sought to grow this entire UV category with a new offering. So, here we start thinking from the product, why it is relevant to the audience and how to make it relatable. So, all these steps are followed in bringing the product in front of consumers and earning their trust and ensuring the journey goes forward. So, here the key challenge for the company was identifying who were the right kind of people for their new vehicle, which was the Xylo. Now, the Xylo obviously is more of an urbane vehicle. The looks of it, obviously, as you can see, are vastly different from the more rugged, more outdoorsy Scorpio. And it was thought of that where marketing would actually place this particular product would be in the urban centers, and people would want that kind of comfort, that kind of driving, styling, etc., which would add to Mahindra and Mahindra's capabilities. Now, here we explore how Mahindra and Mahindra navigated this particular challenge through strategic marketing analysis and consumer targeting, leading to that particular positioning in the market. So here, let's go back and understand a little bit more of Mahindra & Mahindra before we start delving into the details of the case. Mahindra has been one of India's homegrown automotive powerhouses, but the fact is that beyond the borders of India, they have actually arisen and become a global powerhouse now. They are a 16.7 billion multinational headquartered in Mumbai. They have their products being sold in the Middle East, in Australia, in the US and various other countries. They are ranked among India's top 20 companies and the world's top 200 reputable firms by Forbes as early as 2009. So they've been doing this for a while, and their top honcho Anand Mahindra is a fairly feisty CEO who's very well known, well respected in the business circles, and he is also very adored for his very clear and very constructive views on things. He also has an excellent wit, which is what brings people closer to him. Now, this thought process was also invested back into the company, and that helped them become a sort of a market leader. They dominated the UV market, the urban utility vehicle market in India, and they stood as the world's largest tractor manufacturer, and this is the background from which Mahindra & Mahindra actually attempted the consumer utility vehicle segment. They already had UV manufacturing in 1954 and they partnered with Willys Overland Corporation. Their Willys Jeep is a well-known feature, being typically part of any sort of outdoorsy work, and especially it would be featured as a police car, as well as forestry officials would use it, and it was seen as a very manly, rugged vehicle which could brave any sort of terrain. Now, with that particular thought process, they came up with the Commander, then the Bolero, then the Scorpio. All their expressions in terms of automotive design were very rugged, outdoorsy, but now they had to turn a softer corner for the urban user. And this is what drove their ambitious vision, because they aimed to dominate the UV market in India while establishing a significant global presence elsewhere as well. Now, the Indian automobile industry was also at that point in time in a spurt of market evolution, and that is very well tracked because it had a CAGR of 8% from 99 to 2003. In 2004 itself, cars held about an 80% of the market share, in which UVs had 20%, and they were the fastest growing segment at a clip of 37%. So this was something which was very well received by the organizations and also by the consumer on the ground. So this is what actually drove the entire aspect of UV consumption and acceptance in India. By financial year 2010, UVs made up easily 13% of the market, and this was dominated by the SUVs with a 7 to 11 lakh rupee range. So this is the kind of marketplace that we were looking at, and the key drivers of utility vehicle growths were IT/ITES sector, increasing urbanization and lifestyle upgrades. People were moving into urban centers like Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi, Kolkata and such like, and even local capitals of states would also invite a lot of audiences coming from the hinterland and populating the urban areas. So hence, the utility and the lifestyle shifts which people saw, and because of the IT and ITES sector, there was more disposable income at hand. So hence, people could utilize that particular income, and hence that also saw the growth of people's ability to pay and buy such vehicles. So all of these factors together brought into play the actual acceptance of the UV segment, within which we actually saw sports utility vehicles, the SUVs, which were the vanguard of the entire category. Then you had multi-utility vehicles, which were more family oriented, and there was certain amount of market segmentation which we'll also probe. So, SUVs were built on a light truck chassis and they were designed for an off-roading capability, because that is typically where the whole fun of driving, where there were no roads, is what drove people to buy these particular cars. These also had higher seating capacity, so hence you could plumb your entire family or your friends in and go away on a nice little road trip. The rugged appearance made the masculinity of that particular car more appealing, and hence people would take that up, and it appealed to an adventure seeking consumer, people who, yes, were living the urban life, but they yearned to step outside and explore whatever else is there in the countryside. The multi-utility vehicles were slightly more refined, they were versatile and they offered a spacious design. They were more oriented towards comfort and therefore hence they were more towards family rather than outdoorsy activities, and this is typically also found in all the features that they showcased. And it was a very clear balance between utility on one side and comfort on the other. So, the way the market segmentation moved, that you had actually got pickups which gave them the commercial focus. So, if you had a Bolero, you had a Bolero pickup. If you had a Scorpio, you even had a Scorpio pickup. And then there was the entry of soft tops, because people wanted some wind in the hair. So, when they wanted, they could roll down the top and they could actually have an open air experience in their cars. Also, there was a premium segment which focused on hard tops, people who were into serious driving and they would go everywhere. So, that was the particular aspect looked into here. There were also luxury SUVs which were high end, and that would actually carry the most premium of features and actually give people the ultimate touch of both off-roading capabilities as well as the luxuries that any top-end car can provide. And this was suitable for both passengers as well as the cargo segment. Even in the pickup industry, they were actually creating more and more features and more luxuries, so that high-end buyers could use the pickups for both commercial purposes as well as personal adventure purposes. So, this was the evolving marketplace, and within that Mahindra was playing a very, very important pivotal role. Mahindra had about a 40% UV market share, but faced a certain amount of stagnation, especially from the years 2005 to 2007. This was because there was increasing competition, about 40 plus brands at that point in time, and a 1.4 million number of cars and UVs which were already on the road. So, there was very, very stiff competition. So, it was not really a blue ocean scenario. So, and at the same point in time, rural presence was something which was very strong in the case of Mahindra, but products were not there which were aimed at urban consumers, because urban consumers wanted and expected a certain amount of refined stylization which was not coming their way, and they had to make do with whatever was available which had that masculine rugged look and therefore looked more rustic than really sophisticated. And there was therefore the need to expand their product portfolio without eating up any existing product. So, this is the shift that Mahindra was trying to exhibit and include in their own offering set. With that in mind, the portfolio and marketing strategy was devised, where they had a lot of things to look into. The first being the historical focus. Now, Mahindra traditionally catered to the rough terrain. Remember the Willys Jeep here? So, that was iconic, and that Willys Jeep under license was being manufactured and marketed in India by Mahindra. So, hence that was the starting point, and also gave the necessary legacy and imagery which Mahindra carried forward in their other products. It was very, very clearly aimed at the rural markets and government institutions, with utilitarian vehicles being plumbed in. So, you had the police, you had fire services, you had forestry services, you had mining, you had a variety of government liaisons which would actually take up these particular vehicles and they would use them, and they would also get featured in popular culture. So, popular culture also mirrored exactly the same utility which was there relevant in society. Now, there clearly remained a gap which was identified by Mahindra, and by 2007 they found that the company lacked products which were aligned with modern urban consumer needs and preferences, who were looking for something which was a bit more sophisticated, a bit better looking, a little less overshadowed masculinity, and a bit more refined in its overall appeal. And therefore, they actually decided to shift strategically. Here, the decision was to offer something which was new and expand the portfolio with some sort of a differentiated product to sustain their leadership position in the UV segment. Management obviously approved this because they endorsed this strategy to explore new consumer segments without abandoning what was working for them, their original, supportive, very easily captured core markets. So, they wanted to have more slices of the pie, and that is typically where the action also went. Now, in terms of understanding the consumer's preferences were also shifting. There were lots of drivers which moved consumer preferences in a certain compass direction. So, there was rising affordability, so more money to spend, hence higher end particular products were being sought after, and that obviously included luxuries like cars. And earlier cars were considered luxuries, now they became pretty much the normal. And hence India's GDP was a big factor because its per capita GDP doubled from 2000 to 2009, and hence that actually pushed people towards purchasing larger cars, which they did not really mind too much even when it guzzled a little more petrol. Now, there were also easily more financing options because 65 to 70% of cars were purchased through financing. Banks had modernized, NBFCs were around the corner. The tie-ups between the financiers as well as the manufacturers was pretty much there. The showrooms themselves offered a variety of offerings when it came to financing solutions. So, you could get it from them, you could run into a bank and get it from your particular bank of choice. So, there were lots of options which were available. So, ability and availability of options both together started working in favor of the consumer decision to take up that particular kind of vehicle. Also, when they came up with new products, Xylo was created to blend the capabilities of a sedan. They brought in the luxury which came from there and gave the aggressiveness from the SUV segment. So, both things together were formulated so that it provided the sort of balancing act between the sedan's luxury and refinedness with the aggressive posturing of an SUV and made it acceptable to the urban outdoorsy consumer. And there were certain very clear value expectations which brands had. So, they wanted value for money, they wanted the style, they wanted the space, they wanted the comfort. All of these factors were things that consumers looked for and were very happy to see met by manufacturers who provided them with products which ticked the check boxes on all of these factors. So, with all these things taken into consideration, Mahindra actually went into the detail and rigor. When you do something which is centered around consumers, you need to understand what they have to say, when they have to say, and hence a comprehensive 100-day consumer study was initiated, where they identified that they were very much right in that particular demand, and there was a need for premium, spacious, fun to drive UVs, which would also give them a sense of accomplishment. And these insights directly led to the development of that particular model, the Xylo, which aimed to combine the comfort of a sedan and aggressive styling of the SUV. So the research bit, which is critical, we've learnt about research previously. Research puts the consumer's perspective in front of the marketer, in front of product development. And whosoever is thinking around the consumer is going to provide a certain output that meets their expectations, and the chances of offtakes with a larger population are obviously higher. So with that in mind, we looked at what the consumer segmentation for this was. So there was a basic segment from which things started, where two-wheelers, where people upgraded without prioritizing on cost and mileage. Then there was a value-seeking segment which typically asked kitna deti hai. So therefore, these were first-time buyers seeking affordability and wanted it to be low maintenance in terms of their vehicle buy. Then there were certain people who had sort of arrived in life, and so therefore they were seeking the comfort inside of a car. So they prioritized aesthetics, they wanted more space in the car, and they actually were happy taking comfort instead of cost. So they actually looked at comfort higher and did not pay too much heed to the cost. And then beyond this, there were two other segments. One was an individualist segment which wanted to make a statement. So hence, these would be the young, successful buyers who were seeking personal expression, and hence those people could be addressed here. While right at the top, sitting pretty, were status seekers. Here, they wanted premium output, and hence the customers were also people who wanted brand and exclusivity, and those were the final touches that were in the mindset of the topmost segment. Now, Mahindra and Mahindra categorized their consumers based on the benefits that they were seeking, and they created comprehensive segmentations through this entire model. And this pyramid represents the progression from basic transportation needs to premium status oriented purchases and helps position each vehicle in their portfolio. Now, understand this very importantly, that within the entire offering of a particular vehicle, there are various slabs. So there are entry level models and there are top end models, and then there are mid tier. Why this is important is because with each slab that you climb upwards, there are features, accessories, certain aspects which are built in better, and they also nowadays marry into the particular requirements of the government and authorities. Like NCAP rating has become a big thing now because safety has become a very, very big concern and issue. So entry level models will provide you basic security, whereas the top end will provide you the utmost in security. And similarly, in terms of the accessories, the kind of upholstery you put in, the kind of luxuries which you experience within that particular driving and vehicle experience, all of these things are built in, and hence the price also tends to go up. So this is directly proportional to price. So price and the verticalization of variants in the offering, they create those tiers which people can then choose according to whatever actually adjusts with their pocket. So now the question arises, how do you get into the act of targeting the right consumer for Xylo? Now, various things are there in terms of the precedents that have been set up by models which have been created before. So you can take those learnings, and with those learnings you can set about doing what you have to do now. So their most acclaimed product, which was the Scorpio, it had a very typical positioning where it targeted status conscious males who were seeking premium SUVs with aggressive styling and commanding road presence. A very clear kind of approach when it came to what the vehicle delivered, a very clear kind of approach when it came to who the consumer was and what they expected from that particular vehicle that they were buying. Then there was the Bolero, the commercial success. So one is the brand side of it, one is the more higher selling number. Now this was more rustic in nature and it was spread thin across multiple segments, and it led to brand dilution and unclear positioning in the market because it had a lot of offerings when it came to consumer cars, when it came to stretch cars, when it came to pickups, various formations of the pickup. So a lot of models were available, and it was not seen as very premium offering. It was seen as it'll get the job done kind of a car. So hence the Bolero was very unclear in the way it positioned itself, although because of its high versatility and low price, people were definitely buying the Bolero, but the mindset was not being very clear. So hence they identified from all of these experiences who Xylo's target audience would be. So these would be people who were comfort seeking males, who are young, aspirational and desire space and modern features in the vehicle that balances the style that a particular sedan stroke SUV will have together, as well as the practicality of that particular platform. So this opportunity mapping revealed distinct needs across various price points, and it allowed Mahindra to position a vehicle very precisely. Xylo was specifically designed for consumers who wanted a vehicle suitable for both daily commuting and weekend leisure activities. Not people who were on the road 24/7, but people who just wanted to do a little trip around wherever they were. So if you are in Bangalore, maybe you are going into Mysuru. If you are in Delhi, you are probably going down to Neemrana. If you are in Bombay, you are going to Lonavala, things like that, or maybe even Pune. So things that actually focused on the weekend getaway rather than a daily travel, daily big time on the road kind of routine. This is what helped people craft the way the brand was being positioned. Along with that came the styling, and hence it offered that particular ability for the brand to position itself. Hence, the positioning became successful for Xylo, and you actually created a new category in the entire act. They aimed to establish a distinct segment within the Mahindra UV portfolio. It also had a balanced positioning, which was that of an MUV, a multi-utility vehicle, and it had sedan-like comfort and SUV-like aggression. It was a nice fine balance between both. It also had a very clear urban market focus. So it was not talking to people from the hinterland. It was talking to people in the city, and it addressed these urban needs without cannibalizing your Boleros or the Scorpios of the world. And there was a very clear strategy aimed towards growth. Here you targeted high growth and within the UV segment. So you wanted to own your particular foothold within the entire UV segment. The Xylo was strategically positioned to fill a gap in Mahindra's portfolio and created this new category that blended the best attributes of different vehicle types. And at times, when you make a mix, it tends to turn out as a hodgepodge. Thankfully and very versatilely so, Mahindra managed to address the mindset very clearly of the consumer, and hence was able to come up with an offering that met the exact needs of urban consumers. And this approach allowed Mahindra to expand its market presence without undermining its existing successful models. So obviously, what happens when you are successful? The numbers start to show up. So you've got 40% market share, which gave Mahindra the dominant position in the UV segment, and it got 5 very clear consumer segments to rally behind it, and this was from basic to status seeking, and Xylo targeted very clearly the comfort seeking segment, which was happy doing a bit of both. You had the 100 days of research which fueled the entire thought process and the thinking and the product development, and they launched this in 2009. So when they did this, it became Mahindra's strategic move to capture urban consumers who are currently under-attended, and that is typically where they established a particular differentiated targeting and positioning in a very highly competitive market. And because they identified the specific segment and created a product that addressed the unique needs, they were able to expand the portfolio and maintain their leadership in the UV space. So this Xylo journey was for its intended TG, and because of whatever it could manage, after the success of Scorpio had cast a very long shadow. So hence, for another particular exercise at marketing, at product development, to meet that kind of success was very daunting for the team at Mahindra Marketing. So hence, They were fighting against market stagnation, rising competition, all of these things were there, and they wanted the blend of comfort with ruggedness, sedan, SUV. So, all of this positioning helped them create an offering which was for urban males, young professionals and families seeking desired style, space and a refined driving experience. Now, the Scorpio was very clearly upwards in the entire pyramid like we saw. The Bolero obviously was more diverse, less properly positioned, and it catered to the lower end of the market where the positioning did not matter so much. The price consciousness was the more important factor, and it strategically filled a market gap without cannibalizing either of the two existing segments. And this helped Xylo maintain their evolving leadership in the UV segment, and they also offered an innovative alternative and reshaped the perceptions of MUVs also within the entire country, because after Mahindra managed to do this, MUVs became a particular category of interest, and lots of other brands, lots of other automotive manufacturers, they jumped into it in the longer run. Now, having done this, let's look at the other case study we were talking about today, which was Kellogg's. Now, Kellogg's is a very successful breakfast cereal brand from the world over. They are celebrated in many countries, but they do have that little Western effect. So, when they arrived in India, they were figuring out a way to get into the breakfast table inclusion within the Indian diaspora. And that was a challenging task, because getting to the Indian breakfast table is an uphill task. We are used to or set with certain kind of expectation when it comes to our breakfasts. Now, here they needed a platform that actually connected with the expectation and mindset of consumers. So, clearly a challenge when it comes to market positioning. And though it was globally successful, Kellogg's was facing these significant hurdles in that particular positioning act and putting its brand effectively into the Indian market. Why was it a difficult Indian journey? Because they were unable to establish a foothold in India and proved more challenging than anticipated. They had thought we would come in with our international pedigree, we would offer the very best, and we would be very, very, upmarket, and people would just queue up to buy Kellogg's. Didn't happen. Instead, it required multiple strategic pivots and shifts before the brand finally managed to lodge itself in the consumer's mindset. And there were a lot of strategic objectives. Earlier ones were missed, later ones were achieved, and that actually drove how Kellogg's primary goals, although they remained consistent, was to increase sales volume and ensure sustainable brand growth. And because India had a huge market, if you just got 2% of the market share in India, they would be a bigger brand than they were in the US. So, that was the kind of potential that was there in the market. So, this was what the larger overarching market in India when it comes to breakfast was. It was a 12 billion rupee market, and this was the estimated market size in 2014, and every year it would grow 15% CAGR, and 13% was expected over the next 5-year projection period. So, this was what people were looking at, within which oats was a new category, and they were looking at about 33% growth, because it was the highest growing category in 2014. Lots of other brands were also making a foray for that particular space. And what was driving all of this? Indians were getting health conscious. So, health consciousness was causing Indians to move towards more fibrous intake and food choices, and this was therefore why oats were becoming more favored. Even cereals and muesli options were being considered very, very strongly, especially in the urban markets. This market was currently dominated by international brands like Kellogg's and PepsiCo, but regional players maintained a distribution advantage because they had their own territories divided up, and they were able to provide a long-standing product which was known locally, and hence it had an immediate offtake from shelves, something which Kellogg's was finding difficult to disrupt. And this competition was also ready to eat brands in the form of MTR and Britannia, which had the same product, in the sense oats, and they were trying to eat away that particular space which Kellogg's was again fighting for. Also, a big stumbling block was consumers' general orientation towards what they wanted for breakfast. This was one big core habit based input which had to be broken into, and this was something which made Kellogg's really sweat it. There were very clear cultural patterns. India lacked a strong breakfast culture because people here would more move towards a brunch, and it was very common in many households. So, people would generally eat a little later but hefty, and traditional preferences were for food which was homemade. So, you had hot regional foods like poha, dalia, parathas, idli, dosas, and this dominated the traditional breakfast choices, and people were not very willing to move away from these choices at the outset. The changing habits because of health considerations and various other things were that people who had some amount of Western influence were gradually shifting. But this was only amongst the younger Indians, and this was happening very slowly. So, the adoption again is becoming very, very taxing for the household, because if you have to do multiple breakfasts for different family members, then it becomes a chore for the people preparing it. And hence, that was also something which put a little bit of hindrance in the entire path to Kellogg's getting their market share. One thing which came to their benefit was the urbanization impact. So, you had dual income households and urban lifestyles, and therefore, there was increased breakfast for convenient breakfast options, because you had to quickly eat and you had to rush, because you had the entire day ahead of you, and people were more inclined towards getting themselves out of home with enough nutrition and nourishment inside of them, so that they could take their day head on. So, this is how Kellogg's got into India. They had global leadership, and it was a worldwide leader in breakfast cereals, and in India, they noticed the market opportunity, and India presented a large untapped market which followed economic liberalization of the early 1990s. It was opening up. So, hence there was the opportunity of an international heavyweight to come in and garner market share within that space. Now, here Kellogg's made a major investment in 94 and invested 65 million to launch cornflakes in the market, because cornflakes was the core foray, and this was typically where they would start things off from. They in the outset had high expectations, and they projected that what we were speaking of before, 2% market share in India would exceed their US market size, because that was the population size of India, and that is how they could easily tap into that particular kind of revenue stream. Now, this was not to happen so easily. So, initially when they started, this was their initial positioning strategy. They had a health focused positioning, and it positioned itself as a health brand, directly challenging traditional Indian breakfast habits, and they would say that this is healthy, what you've been doing so far is not. And that instantly got a lot of resistance. The moment you push people to shift behavior, to shift habits, to shift their belief systems, if you will, there automatically raises a lot of heckles from people. People say, who are you to come and tell us with whatever God Almighty knowledge you may have, that we've been doing it wrong. We've been doing this for millennia. You can't just walk in and say that your little processed product food is suddenly better than ours, what we've been doing for time immemorial. So, hence that particular thing instantly created resistance. There was also a product portfolio which they did. So, they launched 3 variants tailored for the market. So, they had corn flakes, wheat flakes and rice flakes. The acceptance for these things was there, but Indians already had this. India had rice puffs, rice flakes in the form of poha or murmura or muri, as it is known in various parts of the country, or laya in the north. And wheat flakes were also germinated wheat flakes, which were very common, and people would consume these. So, these aspects were not something which were new. They thought that they could easily get into that kind of space, but people were askance to move into such a very, very defined space, because they knew what to do with these particular condiments, and they did it at home by their own selves. They did not need an international player coming and telling them otherwise. In terms of the marketing approach, they promoted it with the tagline, Jago jaise bhi, lo Kellogg's hi. But Kellogg's alone as a brand name was not enough to define that this was the greatest product that could have sold. And it just emphasized the crispiness and cold milk serving method, which was not entirely up to everybody's palate. India wanted salty, spicy, maybe at times a slightly acidic food. So we had a lot of sub-segments within the entire population of India. And all these sub-segments had grown up with a variety of traditional foods, and hence the Indian palate was also divided into all these spaces which were individually looking for their own various amounts of comfort. Breakfast is something which prepares you for the entire day. So you want comfort food first thing in the morning so that you are ready to meet the world and its challenges which it might throw at you. So hence you want that kind of product which gets you ready and going in the morning. So there was very clearly this cultural disconnect, and this failed to resonate with Indian consumers who traditionally preferred hot meals for breakfast. One big upswing for traditional meals was they were hot, and Indians were used to having garam paratha, garam puri, garam, everything was hot, everything was garam. So that garam was being missed because you were suddenly pouring cold milk, which was the complete antithesis to what Indians were used to. In order to break through with that kind of a thought process or that kind of a mindset, it takes a lot of doing, and Kellogg's were rather unprepared for that. And this was the set of initial challenges which Kellogg's ran into. You had the habit resistance, which was the most basic and fundamental challenge they were facing. The product experience itself, because the cold milk make the flakes soggy. We are used to having crispy, crunchy things with a little bit of bite, some mouthfuls which are wholesome and fulsome. So that reduced the appeal, and it was more of a Western, very bland approach to having foods. Indians have and are very used to spice. We have spice as a very deep and core center of whatever food offerings we have. So moving to something which was bland and sweet and that much only was something which people did not really take up to that well. So the product experience was also something which missed that particular target. Then again, there were cultural values. So people preferred their cost-effective home-cooked meals, and they were cooking it at home, so they were able to manage the oil, the amount of richness that was going in, and the healthiness of it, because they were sourcing produce by their own selves. So they did not really bother too much for what an international player would have to say. Yes, it was also costly. So hence price would also become a major barrier. And there was initial curiosity, because there were initial sales because people got pushed because of the novelty factor. But soon that died out, because once you've tasted it, there is no new news about it that keeps people going in that particular direction. Hence, that novelty, the moment it died out, also got the sales coming crashing down. So that became a big challenge for Kellogg's. Now, therefore, the entire process went into repositioning and product extensions. Why was this important? Because the initial plan had utterly failed. They moved to a kid-focused shift in 1996-97. They introduced Chocos, they introduced Frosties. This was typically stuff which was sweet and had worked wonders in their international markets, because children with their sweet tooth wanted that kind of particular product, and hence their positioning of cereals as snack options rather than breakfast was something which moved out first and foremost. Then they launched Indian flavors in 98. They launched Maza with localized Indian flavors, which ultimately failed to gain any amount of traction in the market, because it was a very vague and unclear option to what people were otherwise getting in taste and better. So hence, trying to force fit yourself as an alternative to what people have and are used to, again, was meeting with resistance. Lots of times, consumer behavior is something that needs to be understood first before you design a product and any amount of marketing around it. And those are the aspects which were missed by Kellogg's at that point in time. Again, in 99, they tried to go the nutritional repositioning route, and they launched iron Shakti. So they talked about the iron deficiency, and they said that in order to fulfill the iron supplement needs that a human being requires, the iron inside the cornflakes is something which people can use, and emphasized how iron supplementation is necessary for children's growth. And therefore, they did localized branding also at the same point in time. They adopted culturally relevant messaging with calcium Shakti also to connect with the Indian concerns. The fun part here is the calcium does not come from the cornflakes, it comes from the milk. The milk is the one which is carrying calcium. Again, milk by itself cannot provide calcium to you. Milk provides calcium only when there is vitamin D3. So, all of these things were part of the missed conversations which Kellogg got into. But again, people aren't also too well read, so they don't understand the science behind these things. But a series of sustained failures were plaguing the Kellogg's team. So, hence they moved into a very clear market by market approach. So, they did that in their promotion strategies. They got into localized branding. Localized branding is important because they removed the iconic rooster mascot from Indian advertisements to better align with local preferences and cultural sensitivities, because the rooster is a sign of an animal and people in India are more vegetarian than not. So, are you having a rooster for breakfast? No, not really. So, hence that rooster aspect was taken away from the conversation, and that allowed for some amount of localized acceptance which came in first and foremost. Then people actually never knew, they never tried the product. Hence, the next aspect which was brought into the activations aspect was product sampling. Try it first, then buy it. Hence, they distributed small packs in retail stores and conducted door-to-door trials to increase product awareness and familiarity. They also got into RWAs, which was Resident Welfare Associations. So, they got into colonies, they went door to door and ensured that people received small samples to try the product out. Once you've tried it, once your kids have it and they like it, then you can hook them on. And then they also did community campaigns, which was very important, because when you have to drive a cultural shift, you have to move with the core building block, which is the community. So, they did all of this through Kellogg Breakfast Week in 97 to raise awareness about nutrition and the importance of having a good breakfast. So, this is where people started acknowledging that they were meaning well and they had certain things which were in their favor, and grudgingly that support started to show. Their last clear shift towards nutrition and owning the space of knowledge, owning the space of education around nutrition is something which also started to pay off, because they focused on preventing anemia. These were problems which were affecting people, and that is when they started showing the mirror to people and saying, these are the problems. If you are malnutrited, then you will face these problems, so will your children. And hence they started solving the problems. When marketing or when product creation happens, the first thing which any new product development person or any marketer should think of is, why will somebody buy me? And when you ask that critical question, the first thing you need to come to know is, what is it that I am going to offer them that nobody else has? What is the differentiation? What is it that will give them the chance to approve of me more than what they have been doing so far? So, that shift, that differentiation, that need for something that is fresh, that is new, that is unique, that is something they haven't explored, that is something they haven't thought of before, that there is a, oh, I see moment in their lives. That is what is at the core of any marketing activity, whether it be a television ad or whether it be a newspaper print ad or a radio commercial or a digital story or a content piece or some influencer speaking or some store activation or some resident welfare activation or an AR VR experience. At the end of the day, it is to make people realize that there is something that you were missing so far, and that is precisely what this particular brand, this particular product has now brought to you. Something you were denied, something that you had not experienced in the past. That is where the fundamental shift can be affected by anything in marketing. Also, a factor is that if you get children, that will automatically bring mothers into the space. So with that, they identified these consumer triggers. They also, like in the case of Mahindra, got into research. An advertising firm, one of the biggest, JWT, did the research and revealed that Kellogg's, though positioned for kids, was consumed by the entire family, and afternoon snacking was a major consumer need. And also women wanted healthier options for weight management, which was a missing piece in the puzzle. And therefore, you had product innovation which came in. You got celebrities, people who were more of opinion leaders, people whose voice was respected and heard. Those people were now brought into part of the play, including people like chefs. And the inclusion was more towards adult product innovation. So hence you had multigrain, fortified cornflakes and specially formulated for adult nutrition needs. You had an advertising shift and advertising moved prominently to feature adults consuming the cereal. And the snacking segment was also entered into, where you positioned chocos as a healthy alternative to junk food, again addressing a problem which mothers typically had. This helped them expand their target audience to include adults and position certain products for snacking occasions. And this was where Kellogg's was able to tap into new consumption opportunities. You built more occasions to consume the product and showcased them, reflected where in society this was happening, so that it felt something which was ownable, which was natural. And that's where it got more people to try and then buy the products. So this was the aspect, and the brand connected with broader segment of Indian consumers. But there was the biggest piece which worked in their favor: women wanting weight management. And that is where their iconic launch of Special K worked in their favor. This was a huge runaway success, and the launch strategy for this was conceived in 2008, where specialized weight management brand Special K was launched for women aged 25 to 44 who were seeking low calorie meal options, so that they would be sustained, yet they would be able to watch their weight. And this worked as a lifestyle choice rather than just a breakfast cereal. So this was a regimen, and that is something which you got a very, very health conscious and very, very celebrated Indian beauty, Lara Datta, to push for them. So this is what they actually got working for them in a big way, and that helped them expand the market. Special K helped Kellogg get into multiple valuable market segments, where the weight management market, which was 500 crores, they got in. Convenience foods market, 750 crores, they got in. Breakfast cereal market, 250 crores, they got in. And health foods, more importantly, was a 2000 crore market. Again, they managed to put their foot inside the door. Amazing movement, because now consumer research defined what is it that was the missing gap, and those gaps were getting plugged. They had a decent product, but plugging the necessary gaps in people's minds. This is what we are talking about, that products are not built in the shop floor, in the factory, in an organization. They're built in people's minds, and that's where brands get established. And that's typically the kind of lessons which Kellogg's learnt out of the entire exercise here. And hence, you understood that you have to, when you're looking at a geography as large and as diverse as India, you have to look at local relevance. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. You have to look at Indian consumers, languages change, food consumption patterns change, choices people make, those change. So hence, you have to walk with the geography, you have to walk with the culture, and Indian consumers needed these products with localized relevance, and that is what they had to get into. Also, they looked at customized messaging. The north, the south, the east, the west, they were to be treated separately, and tailored communication and flavors which appealed to these audiences were also required for what they found later market success. Then strategic positioning, so that earlier what was being failed was 80% of cases, those strategic positionings were shifted, the adults were brought in, the consumptions were showed, and Snacking was a separate segment. The health and fortification was a separate segment. Weight watching was a completely new addition. All of these factors brought in a lot of success and continuous adaptation. So they were always looking, always learning, and that is why they evolved and kept putting up offerings which matched the shifting Indian lifestyle, because people were evolving. India as an economy was evolving. Their tastes, their wants, their desires, their expectations from life was evolving. So you had to keep track of all of these things. And when a brand starts to walk that path alongside a consumer, then they're able to target and tap into their life's needs. And when they are able to do that efficiently, that is when the brand starts to get sticky in consumers' minds. It becomes a friend to the consumer. That is why it has been a challenging journey for Kellogg's, for sure. Its path in India was filled with all these obstacles that were there and provided valuable market insights and learning opportunities, which they finally and thankfully learned from. There was a lot of cultural adaptation, which is important because local habits were important, preferences, learning them, bringing them into the fold was important, and that is how they gained acceptance. This was there. There was diversified growth, and snacking and health segments, as we discussed, were aspects which helped them build those extra side audiences, and together it pushed the entire brand out there and moved beyond the traditional breakfast category. So finding the right platforms and genuinely connected with Indian consumers, it still remains crucial. Again, India is going through a major upheaval and in a variety of ways. So you have to understand this is the second coming of India's urban audience. Now, beyond the metros, you're moving into state capitals. Beyond state capitals, you're moving into other cities, and a lot of industrialization is setting in, a lot of urbanization is setting in. So those needs, those aspirations, those local cultures at a very granular level have to be tracked. They have to be looked at. And these are uncertainties. These are, again, like we discussed, VUCA factors. Everywhere, if you look deep enough, you will find the uncertainty, you'll find the complexity, and complexity is very much at the core of all of these things. So marketers have to wisen up to these things and learn and deliver on these expectations. So with that, we come to the conclusion that positioning, understanding of how consumers accept you in their lives is at the core, and it's the art of creating that particular distinct space inside the consumer's mind. In the case of Xylo, we've seen that how they created a unique need and its answer in sedan-like comfort with SUV ruggedness, and which was unlike the Scorpio or Bolero cannibalization offers which were there from the upmarket and the lower market brands that they have. They steered clear of cannibalizing those two brands. Xylo targeted comfort seeking urban buyers. They understood the mindset, the kind of people they were trying to approach, and that white space which they had without existing models being cannibalized. And this actually gave a lot of practical, affordable and aspirational appeals for consumers to pick up from. Similarly, Kellogg's Cornflakes entered India and they botched it up initially with a health and Western breakfast culture mindset, but that is the initial problem that they ran into. They learned from it and understood that Indians preferred hot savory breakfast rather than sweet cold ones. That helped them reposition, and Kellogg's adapted its messaging, highlighted convenience, lightness, nutritional value and moved towards local preferences. With both these, you understand how brands must understand consumer behavior at the core, identify untapped opportunities, because that is where you will position, you will gain that particular space and own that particular niche, which is important, and craft your positioning strategies, balance the differentiation with market adaptability. So next time we will get into the depth of designing value into and thereafter managing products, because products are at the core. Whatever you do in marketing has to center around those products and how you develop them. So let's move forward together, and I'll see you next time.